Well, in addition to violent crime that we're seeing as a rising problem in Wilmington, the state is also dealing with a statewide heroin epidemic. So how would you prioritize what are often becoming limited resources to dealing with these two distinct problems?
I believe the main problem we have with heroin is it's so addictive. The heroin that's being sold now, when it's used, it becomes, the person becomes an addict right away. In order to deal with the heroin situation, again, we need to understand that we have to look at the crime as a business. It's a business. People are coming in, they're making the product more addictive so that people get hooked easier. So we need to work together. For example, bringing in the FBI that can look at this on a national level and understand where our suppliers are coming from. So we target the people at the top, not necessarily the people who are selling at the bottom. When you get rid of the people who are running the business, then you reduce the crime that's coming into our state. Then again, using the Crime Strategies Unit to bring working class jobs back into the neighborhood will stabilize the neighborhood, because it's not a coincidence that areas in our state that have lost working class jobs are vulnerable to the heroin epidemic.
Thank you, Catherin Damavandi. Matt Denn.
I think this is another example of where my view of what the office does differs from my opponents. I think that that if we do not deal with the substance abuse disorder epidemic that we have in our state, if we don't deal with the demand side of the problem, that we're never going to fully succeed in dealing with the law enforcement side of it. And I've put out a very detailed plan as to how I would propose to deal with the substance abuse problem in our state that I talked to our medical providers about. I talked to the families of many of individuals who have lost their lives as a result of substance abuse. And it is a solvable problem. It involves getting a lot of people who previously haven't been working together around a table and putting together a plan which will involve state resources, insurance company resources, medical provider resources to make it possible, which doesn't exist today, for people who have a substance abuse problem, who want to get treatment at the level that they should be getting it without a waiting period. That's not a role that attorneys general, either in Delaware or around the country, have played before, but I think if you're serious about dealing with the drug problem in Delaware, you have to deal with the treatment side of it, and I do believe that there is a leadership role for the Attorney General to play in organizing that effort and bringing it to fruition.
Thank you, Matt Denn. Next, David Graham.
The heroin problem we have in this state and this city is getting great attention because the statistic is between 85 and 90% of the crime in this state is directly related to the drug business. And from personal experience of having a relative going through the process and successfully being clean for 2 years from heroin and lives with me, he pointed out to me the problem is these people don't have a support system when they come out. And it ties right into the revolving door syndrome we're seeing in this state, where 96% get released, and when they get released back in the community, without working with the community, as community policing, working through the churches, through the fire companies, whichever community groups are available, to try to develop something that works, looking outside our state for solutions. Just throwing money at the problem, just arresting people for crimes that are committed because they can't help themselves when they're addicted to heroin. They're not in their right mind. And if it weren't for the crime problem, we wouldn't really be having the focus. It's affecting everyone in Delaware.
Thank you, David Graham. Ted Kittila.
I've spent some time actually out on the campaign trail talking with people who are working on this problem. And it's a big concern because, like Catherin suggested, one hit does it. They're addicted. The fact is that we tend to dump people out of treatment way too quickly in this state. We do not have enough beds to treat heroin addiction. And there is a flood of heroin coming our way. 4 months ago, I would have guessed, as just an average Delawarean, that the biggest problem that we were facing in Delaware was meth. But that's not the case. Heroin outranks it by far. I think that we need to focus on attacking the problem, of course, at the kingpin level. And that's why I suggested exiling those dealers to the federal system and interrupt the networks that have developed here in the state of Delaware. That's one way to address the problem. There's many more.
A follow-up, if I may.
Okay, thank you, Ted Kittila. Now we're in the crossfire, either reporters or candidates. Go at it.
Well, I I was going to ask, we often see this pendulum that swings between a punitive nature towards drug addiction, and then it goes towards a more rehabilitative approach towards drug addiction. What is your stance, and would you put monies behind it?
Who are you asking?
Anybody?
I guess we'll start with Dave Graham.
Thank you. I raised my hand first.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm on Jeopardy. One thing is the allocation of resources. And as an attorney general, you have the bully pulpit. Yes, you may not directly supervise the state police. You may not supervise the prisons. You don't directly supervise anyone, but as the bully pulpit, you do have a say. And one thing we have to take a serious look at is having, like the federal government does, dormitories, where you transition people out of the situation they're in and back into the community, as opposed to not having a support network.
Shirley, I think that is a false choice. I mean, I think that it is possible and, in fact, appropriate to be very serious about prosecuting, particularly dealers, people who are putting drugs out on the street, and at the same time recognize that if you're not dealing with treating people who have an addiction, that you're not going to solve the problem. So you can do both. And one thing that I agree with Dave, I'm agreeing with Dave a lot tonight. It's kind of scaring me, actually. I think that Commissioner Koop, particularly with the correction system, has brought a very sophisticated view of what we ought to be doing with inmates who are in our correctional facilities in terms of substance abuse, and he's developed a much more nuanced approach that he's trying to put in place to dealing with substance abuse issues that folks who are on the inside have, and that's a valuable opportunity that we have while they are in a facility to try to deal with the substance abuse problem before they get out. But the ideal solution is to get to people before they ever enter the criminal justice system. And again, I think that we know what we need to do. There are lots of different types of addiction, and so you have to be pretty precise about what type of treatment you get somebody into. And there's often a narrow window of time when someone with a problem is willing to admit that they have a problem and seek treatment. And if you have a waiting list when they're ready to seek treatment, you've lost the opportunity. So that does involve resources. But again, I think that it's not just state resources. And one thing that I'm very proud of that I've been able to do as Lieutenant Governor is to get resources from both the General Assembly and from other entities for priorities that I think are important. And I would look to do the same for this very important issue of substance abuse
Okay,
treatment.
that was Matt Denn. Anyone else on the panel? Another minute or so?
Yes, Shirley, treatment is part of the criminal justice system. It needs to be viewed that way. It's not a one-size-fits-all. My job is to protect the citizens of the state of Delaware. And I think protecting them means actually helping to get treatment for people that need it. Dumping them into the prison system, a lot of times that's the worst solution. And so we need to handle it that way. So viewing treatment as part of criminal justice, as part of the system, that's the way to look at it. And I disagree with my opponent here that what we're looking at is a limited role for the Attorney General office. I've never thought that at all. I think this is chief law officer is the way the case law describes it. And that's my goal, is to use the law to affect change to help people, and including those that are struggling with addiction.
Okay, that was Ted Kittila.
And I would like to respond and say that I disagree with all of my opponents. Their answers come from not understanding, again, what the Attorney General's office does and what is the role of the criminal justice system. It seems like their proposals are trying to reinvent the wheel. Our Delaware courts have looked at this situation, and our judges understand the issues that we have with substance abuse. And when people are sentenced to crimes, if it deals with substance abuse, the courts will direct those people to seek treatment. We have programs in prison, such as the Green Tree program and the CREST program, which are recognized nationally for their effectiveness in dealing with addiction. It's a misconception for people on the outside of the criminal justice system to think that when someone has an addiction, they're simply thrown into jail. Sometimes they do go to quasi-incarceration because, of course, someone who's going into a substance abuse program oftentimes wants to leave. They want to step back and go away. So it's not the Attorney General's role to put someone into a rehab program. What happens in sentencing is the Attorney General's office comes before the court as well as the defense attorney, and they both give their proposals to the judge as to why someone should receive treatment or why there should be a different sentence, such as putting them on probation. And the judges use their discretion, and they try to only put the most violent people behind bars, not people who simply have an addiction.
All right, thank you, Catherin Damavandi. If we go another few minutes,
Just
we'll cut out
about
other
20
questions.
seconds.
Yeah.
One thing that's overlooked is the judicial system is grossly overloaded with cases. The judges have a tremendous caseload, and they just can't handle what's being put through.
Okay.